remembering civil rights icon Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. on the 50th anniversary of his assassination. As Senegal University graduates struggle to find jobs, experts mull over higher education overhauls. And how Accra Fashion Week is breaking the style barrier like no other. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Wednesday marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of American civil rights leader and Nobel Prize laureate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Some of Dr. King's children and a host of dignitaries renewed his call for racial and economic justice Tuesday night in Memphis, Tennessee, where his life was ended on April the 4th of 1968.
We lost a daddy to an assassin's bullet. We lost an uncle mysteriously in his swimming pool because he knew something about that assassination.
Just a couple of days ago in Sacramento, we saw a young man gunned down, holding a cell phone. Justice must be done somehow, some way, someday, and really right now.
Where their father spoke about that day of reckoning and justice in one of his memorable speeches on the eve of his assassination.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
The King's vision of better days for all people beyond the racial and economic injustice resonates today, 50 years later. I believe his children and many whose lives he touched through his message of hope are still holding out today. Martin Luther King Jr. marched and mobilized millions to champion civil rights in America. Through a philosophy of nonviolence, King helped advance the United States towards passage of two major laws in the 20th century, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Viewers Arash Arabasadi looks back at the influential, sometimes reluctant leader of the American civil rights movement.
April 9, 1968, the final march of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Just a few days earlier, on the 4th of April, James Earl Ray, the man later convicted of the shooting, assassinated King on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. More than 100,000 people lined the streets of Atlanta, the place of King's birth, as two mules pulled a simple farm wagon carrying his body. King's funeral drew famous faces of the era, including Senator Robert Kennedy, future U.S. President Richard Nixon, and fellow civil rights activist the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Jackson spoke with VOA in August 2011 during the dedication of King's Memorial in Washington.
He really is a symbol of power and justice and peace and reconciliation, but we had to win some mighty battles to get the reconciliation. I mean, the Battle of Montgomery involved confrontation and endurance. 3 and later one day struggle.
Your order to disperse this march will not continue.
The battles of Alabama were for the voting rights denied blacks in many parts of the American South. It was followed by more police violence against civilians in the city of Selma in what came to be known as Bloody Sunday. Congressman John Lewis was one of the leaders of the student protests.
They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses, releasing tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. I had a concussion at the bridge.
Can we have somebody take somebody to a doctor?
I thought I was going to die. I thought I saw death.
The televised violence sparked a national outcry.
We must let the world know that it is necessary to protest this threefold evil. The problem of the denial of the right to vote to police brutality.
A few days later, a court order gave King permission to lead tens of thousands of demonstrators to march from Selma to Alabama's capital, Montgomery.
Martin Luther King Jr. came by to visit me in my hospital room and said, "John, don't worry, we will make it from Selma to Montgomery, and the Voting Rights Act will be passed."
A year after U.S. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, King's strategy of peaceful protest led to the signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
When he believed in the legal process, he thought litigation alone was too slow. You needed litigation, demonstration, and legislation. He believed in mass action to transform the masses marching and to change the culture that drove us for the need to march.
The most famous was the 1963 March on Washington.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up.
An estimated 250,000 people gathered at the National Mall to hear King's iconic speech. It was a dream of freedom and equality in a country that was built on the backs of the enslaved. New York Times reporter Earl Caldwell was sent to Memphis to shadow King.
What was on King's mind and what he wanted to talk to me about was what he called the Poor People's Campaign. He said that he was going to gather poor people from all around the country, bring them to Washington, and he was going to stop the business of the government of the United States until it dealt with the issue of poverty, particularly as it pertained to black people.
Passage of the Civil Rights Act forced legal change in the 1960s, but activists say real change is often slow.
We are a different and a better nation today in the sense that the barbaric laws of and uncivil laws of racial apartheid have ended. So that the social gaps have closed, but the economic gaps, we're free but less equal.
King's legacy of peaceful protest lives on, most recently at the March for Our Lives rally in Washington. Organizers of the gun control march in Washington estimated crowds of about 800,000. Among them, King's granddaughter.
My grandfather had a dream that his 4 little children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Before his assassination in 1968, King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his nonviolent campaign for equality. Today, more than 100 schools and over 900 streets in the United States bear his name. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
Well, during Martin Luther King's lifetime, his nonviolent strategies inspired many. As Daniel Brown finds out while covering a recent march for gun control, it's a legacy that continues today, particularly among American youth.
Elementary school, you learn about MLK, you learn how he ended racism, how he was a peaceful man, and it wasn't until like over this last summer I picked up a book called Radical King, which is a collection of MLK speeches. And reading MLK and memorizing his speeches, you realize how such of a knowledgeable, important man he was, and how he really was about change and love. So MLK helped me to understand what love is and what nonviolent direct action is and how it can work effectively, because it has worked effectively for him. He got this Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And today's march is an example of MLK's nonviolent direct action strategy. We are here creating tension in the nation's capital. We are here creating conflict. We're creating a disturbance in the nation. We are here to raise awareness, because we don't have to be violent. All we have to do is raise our voices up and appeal to the morality of this nation, and we can make change. And MLK helped me realize that, and that's why I'm here.
There's a brighter day ahead for me.
My favorite Martin Luther King Jr. quote is very short. Unjust laws should not be obeyed. That's my favorite Dr. King quote. In other words, Dr. King is saying you have to pay the price if you break the law. That's the social contract that allows us to have society, is the law. But if it's an unjust law, you shouldn't obey that law, although you must be prepared to pay the price.
Attended the Women's March, and we were talking about earlier today how there hasn't been a lot of marches in our lifetime that were as big as the Women's March and as this the March for Our Lives, and this kind of is incredibly comparable to the MLK March and his I Have a Dream speech, and that's what I kind of think of, like just being at the reflecting pool and seeing all these people. You definitely feel the same spirit that the people felt back then.
A characteristic of MLK that really impacted me more than anything else was his fearlessness. Being able to go travel the country and give these marches and give these speeches, knowing the consequences that would come towards him or his family, has motivated me and given me that type of fearlessness. Now, whenever I do things, I know I really have nothing to lose, right? So I give it my 100%, and I try to imitate that same type of energy that MLK had back then.
There's a brighter day ahead for me, and it's gonna lift me higher.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Biz Makori. Coming up, the latest efforts to reform higher education in Senegal. Stay with us.
This is BizBeat.
In Croatia, surrounded by the Adriatic Sea, lies the peninsula Istria, where Istrian olive groves dominate the landscape.
Transfer it practically in over our mouth and make like this.
Olive grower Teddy Chavalon explains the proper way to taste olive oil. Istria now supplies 12% of the world's olive oil market. Olive grower Nicoletta Belija says time has been kind to the growers here as things have changed.
Because the cultivating methods were different, the time when olives used to be picked was different.
Belija says today that flavors are spicier and more aromatic. And experts say climate change has been a factor affecting the quality of the groves. Award-winning oil maker Antonio Pastrovicchio. He says we've embraced serious labor 20 years ago, and now we're seeing the results of that. Finally surpassing Tuscany as the best olive oil in the world 2 years in a row. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
The presidential candidate from Sierra Leone's ruling party, Samora Camara, holds a slim lead over the opposition candidate, Julius Maada Bio, based on the most recent district tallies seen by the Reuters news agency. So far, Camara has secured 50.8% of the nearly 1.94 million votes certified for a lead of about 30,000 votes. But many opposition strongholds ballots have yet to be counted. The largely peaceful election process has come as a relief for the country of 7 million people, but tensions are rising since the election, with each side saying it is on track to win. Now, the streets in Freetown are quiet and many schools are closed on Wednesday as residents wait for the National Electoral Commission to announce official results, which could come at any time. The controversy surrounding the deportation of opposition activist Miguna Miguna has amplified tensions between Kenya's executive and the judiciary. Kenya's Minister of Interior, Fred Matiang'i, now alleges there is a group of evil judges out to humiliate the government. Miguna was deported in February as a prohibited immigrant. The authorities say he had lost Kenyan nationality under a now defunct law. The court then ruled he should be allowed back with his Kenyan citizenship reinstated. He was detained again when he arrived in Nairobi's main airport and later put on a plane to Dubai. Sub-Saharan Africa has the youngest population in the world, and it is growing rapidly. By 2030, the United Nations estimates the region will be home to 25% of the world's 15 to 24-year-olds. How will African countries cope with this sizable new generation striving to study and work? Experts say the curriculum needs to be changed to better meet the needs of the workforce. Sophia Christensen has our report.
Every week, Mormati Ndoye buys cheap clothes from Dakar's Sandaga market. He sells them for a small profit.
After graduating with my degree in physics and chemistry, I needed a job to make a living, but I realized that university hadn't given me the qualifications I needed.
After a year of rejections, Mormati started a part-time course in geomatics and urban planning. What he hopes will be marketable skills in a city overrun with construction projects.
This training will open many doors for me. I can go into remote sensing, cartography. I now know how to make and interpret a map and how to manipulate spatial data.
Like most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Senegal is struggling to employ its youth, especially when they are educated. According to 2017 government data, the unemployment rate in Senegal is actually highest among people with more than a secondary school education.
In Africa, there is this incompatibility between the content of university programs and the needs of the economy. Young people going into higher education expect a higher quality of life and easier access to jobs, but in many countries, they are actually more likely to be unemployed.
Just over half of Senegal's working population is employed in agriculture. The service sector comes second, followed by occupations such as construction and mining. But at Senegal's main public university, more than a third of students are studying humanities. The government sees the need to diversify. Senegal plans to open technical training schools in each of its 14 regions. The state is also building a new agricultural institute and a science and technology university devoted to fields such as electromechanics, aeronautics, land management, and agribusiness. But young people say they need guidance.
Looking back, I would have preferred to do something different, like being a builder, for example. I can't even see the point of having studied, and I can tell you, I'm not the only one.
Moussa Diatta got a government grant to get his degree in finance and banking at a private institute in Dakar. But he has found little demand for his skills. Instead, he manages a second-hand furniture warehouse. He fears time is running out. Each year, 200,000 more youth hit the job market in Senegal. Sophia Christensen for VOA News, Dakar.
A financially distraught yellow cab driver from Romania recently hanged himself in his New York garage, marking the fourth incident of suicide among city taxi drivers in as many months. And the tragedy's aftermath, members of New York's Taxi Cab Drivers Union are renewing their calls for a cap on the number of app-based for hire vehicles such as Uber and Lyft. VOA's Ramon Taylor reports.
Put up $20,000 a year like I have to pay my mortgage.
The financial hardship that led to the suicide of a 65-year-old Romanian immigrant and near 30-year veteran of New York's yellow cab industry is becoming a familiar narrative to his colleagues and close friends.
He couldn't take it. I will take it. I will die fighting. I'm not going to leave it like this. It is in my right because I invest in city and they are robbing me now.
The number of yellow cabs in New York City is capped at over 13,000. But for hire cars like Uber, which face no such limits, have burgeoned since their debut in 2012, more than 60,000 to date.
We are sick and tired of burying our brothers. It is a nightmare. Owner-drivers are going through foreclosures and bankruptcies. Green cab drivers have been entirely abandoned. Livery drivers are trying to scrape by.
It was here in front of New York City Hall that livery driver Doug Shifter killed himself using a shotgun in February, just hours after posting a message to Facebook detailing his spiraling economic distress. including 100-plus-hour work weeks, a norm among many drivers in the industry.
I didn't have enough money to pay this month's rent.
Fewer pickups mean more hours on the road. For the city's immigrant population, which accounts for more than 90% of all professional drivers, that poses a deepening crisis.
After lease and gas, you not make nothing for yourself. So you have to work like 15, 16 hours, what you're making in before 10 hours, you know.
I'm even surprised that there are no more drivers committing suicide or going on some other sort of rampage at this time, because this business has been so destroyed.
Nigerian native Emmanuel Agbai owns a taxi medallion, a license required for all canary yellow taxicabs. It was once a prized possession costing over $1 million in 2014, but has since fallen to 1/5 that value, coinciding with the rise of app-based services. Customers have more budget-friendly choices, making the option to own or lease a taxi far less profitable.
I want to work, I'm willing to work, ready to work every day to make my living. I love driving cab. In fact, I have a lot of education, but I chose to do this job, okay? At the end of the day, if I cannot make money, my love for this job doesn't mean a thing.
Ramon Taylor, VOA News, New York.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, dazzling looks from the runway at Accra Fashion Week. We'll be right back.
In the Central African Republic, a United Nations peacekeeper was killed and 11 others were injured after anti-Balaka militants stormed the UN base in Tagbara, which led to a gunfight that lasted hours. In Cameroon, the army frees 18 hostages in the Anglophone region, 12 European tourists and 6 municipal councillors who had been seized by separatists. Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa meets with his Chinese counterpart, who says they should work toward a new chapter. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Union for Democracy and Social Progress elected Félix Tshisekedi, the son of the party founder, as its new leader. Finally, in Libya, woodcarver Abdallah Said creates intricate pieces of art that represent elements of the Libyan culture.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. African designers gather to showcase the latest clothing trends at Accra's Fashion Week with a blend of African style with Western standards. A prevailing trend involved mixing African prints with other fabrics from Europe and Asia. Accra Fashion Week is more young, designer-friendly than other traditional fashion weeks, providing designers with the information of where and how to have the items mass-produced after receiving their core market. And in other fashion news, supermodel Naomi Campbell says Vogue magazine should launch an African edition to recognize the continent's contribution to a global fashion industry that has been criticized for its lack of diversity. Campbell was visiting Lagos to appear on the runway at Arise Fashion Week. The global fashion industry has attracted criticism because most models for major designers and fashion houses are white. Arise Fashion Week showcased couture from 45 designers from 14 countries, including Tanzania, Nigeria, South Africa, Uganda, Britain, and the United States, among others. And finally, this toothbrush has been turned into a sensor-packed monitoring tool to capture data about how well people are brushing their teeth. The prototype toothbrush doesn't yet have any bristles, with even the most basic toothbrush usually having 500+ bristles. Developers are currently mathematically modeling how bristles move around the mouth. The toothbrush is equipped with sensors that compile a detailed picture of how the brush is being moved around a person's mouth. The data is translated into valuable insights for designers building a better brush. And that's what's trending today. Now, the Volvo Ocean Race teams are in their 8th month of the Round the World race and are now on their way to Brazil, but not before one of the worst incidents in race history occurred when a sailor was swept overboard in high seas and is now presumed lost at sea. Here's VOA's Caroline Turner.
Volvo Ocean Racers recently sailed from Auckland, New Zealand into the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean toward Brazil to complete Leg 7 of the punishing race. The teams were shocked by the news that British sailor John Fisher was swept overboard in high waves. With 1,400 miles to go to Cape Horn, South America, Team Sung Hung Kai Scallywag was sailing in strong gale force winds with a sea state of 5 meters when the 47-year-old British sailor was washed overboard.
We were informed by the Sung Hung Kai Scallywag sailing team that they had a man overboard situation, and they immediately started a search and rescue operation and carried this out under very difficult circumstances with big waves, big winds, and cold conditions.
Search and rescue efforts were complicated by the rest of the fleet being over 200 miles away and maritime rescue 1 day away from the boat's location in one of the planet's most remote regions. After an exhaustive search by shipmates, the sailor is presumed lost at sea.
And this is, of course, a terribly sad moment for all of us. And first and foremost, our thoughts are with John Fisher's family and with the crew members on board Sung Hung Kai Scallywag.
The news about John Fisher has been devastating. The veteran ocean racer had friends across the fleet, and teams are finding it difficult to focus on racing in the dangerous conditions.
So the main focus now is to get the boats safely to the Chilean coast into a port in Chile. They're still in very difficult sea conditions. Race control are supporting them all of the way, planning a safe routing for them, keeping them updated and monitoring their progress.
As the teams sail in punishing conditions toward Cape Horn, with about 2,500 miles to the finish in Istria, Brazil, Team Brunel holds a 50 to 100 mile lead over the rest of the fleet, which is expected to arrive in Brazil in about a week. The Volvo Ocean Race, which covers 45,000 nautical miles, concludes in June after stops in the U.S. and Europe. Carolyn Turner, VOA News.
Well, and that's our show for today, and I'll be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show African News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Got thrown into mobile app development towards like 2010, where I created an app that went viral in Nigeria. Jandos Radio